Prologue. My name is, or was, Vince McGrath. I was once a 20-year-old man, but all that was taken from me by magic, yes magic. When I had left school at 18, had managed to be accepted into a very select university located just outside a large but picturesque Scottish village known as Darkhaven. Surrounded by thick Scottish woodland, Darkhaven is one of those villages where the rich have moved in, raising the property prices and forcing most of the original inhabitants out. Darkhaven is now a home for wealthy businessmen and women who like to escape from the pressure cooker of London. Very few of the native inhabitants remain in Darkhaven, and those that do earn their money working for the rich who live amongst them or in some of the local services and shops. So far life had been good to me. I excelled at sports, I was popular and had a natural talent for science. And during my second term at Darkhaven, I had met and fallen in love with a gorgeous girl named Sarah King. The only fly in the ointment was a strange weasel-like student called Gerald Magestone. Magestone had taken an instant dislike to me from the onset. While he could outperform me in the classroom, he was my inferior in almost every other way. Where I was 6 feet in height, he was barely 5'5". While my body was toned and well developed from exercise, sports and hard work in my father's garden, Magestone had no muscle tone whatsoever. His build was so thin as to be near emaciated. And while I mixed easily with people and had good self-confidence, Magestone found it hard to even talk to strangers. His poor social skills were made worse by his arrogance, born out of the fact that his family were the founders of Darkhaven University. Plus his father, who had died 2 years previously, had been the local lord, a title he was due to inherit on his 21st birthday. At first, being a sociable person, I had tried to win him over, but as time went by, it became more obvious that he would never be a friend and I soon learned to ignore him. And for 2 years I managed to keep my temper despite his best efforts, even when he tried to have me expelled on a falsified theft charge. I did however have the satisfaction of having him issue a public apology in front of the entire university, and pay me £10,000 in damages. Unfortunately for me, I was soon to lose everything in ways I would never have believed possible. Chapter 1, Becoming Jessica. It was early summer. University would be closing for the summer holidays in 2 days' time, and the feeling of the holidays was in the air. I met Sarah after her biology class was finished and we walked down to the university park. I always marveled at her beauty whenever I saw her. Long midnight black wavy hair flowed from her head in a thick, luxurious torrent past her delicate rounded shoulders to halfway down her slender back. She had a perfect figure to my eyes. Some would think her as slightly overweight, as her curves were more reminiscent of a 40s screen goddess. Ample curves graced her form. Her breasts were as perfect as I have ever seen, not too large or too small, and the ideal counterweight to her generously proportioned posterior. Her skin was olive, giving her a Latin look. Her beautiful oval face was flawless. From the tip of her small delicately upturned nose, with its broad finely sculpted nostrils, across her smooth, well-appointed cheeks to her beautiful emerald eyes, I could never find a trace of anything that didn't please me. Today, however, her normally cheerful countenance was serious, the sparkle in her eyes dulled. "Hey Sarah, what's up?" I asked. "You seem down today." "Oh, it's Gerald. He's been hanging around me, and I think he spies on me when I'm in the library." "Gerald? As in Gerald Magestone?" "The very same," she said. "I thought he was harmless enough, but he's been getting creepy lately. I think he's planning something about me too." This made me angry, but I didn't want to show Sarah. I had heard rumors about Magestone and a girl who had attended Darkhaven 3 years before, how he had become interested in her and stalked her. For some reason she left the university, and apparently with a considerable sum of money. Local rumor had it that Magestone tried something and she had to be paid off. "If you want, I could have words with him for you, put him right about things." She looked at me, some of the sparkle back in her eyes. "You would? But don't hurt him. I know he's got me agitated, but I don't think he really means any harm. And be careful, there's something different about him recently." Of course I won't, I'll merely let him know how he stands, and remind him of the legal difficulties he could get into by harassing young women. We spent the rest of the afternoon fooling about on the lawn in the university park, until we had to go to our various lectures and classes. Later that day, at roughly 5 p.m., I saw Magestone heading out of the university grounds. He was heading towards Darkhaven House, his family home. Well, I thought it a good time for us to have words about Sarah, so I quickened my pace and caught up after allowing him enough time to get clear of the university. Coming up quickly behind him, I grabbed him by his collar and yanked him off of his feet. He yelped in shock, dropping the books he had been carrying. One in particular caught my eye, an ancient-looking tome, leather-bound by the look of it. With a speed I didn't think he had, Magestone broke my grasp and snatched the book up, pretty much ignoring the other volumes. "McGrath, what is the meaning of your ape-like attack?" he whined. Magestone always whined. I doubted he could use any other tone. "I wanted to get your attention. We have things to discuss, you and I." "I, McGrath, have little to discuss with a Neanderthal oaf such as yourself. Now let me be about my business." He started to walk away, but I grabbed one of his skeletal arms. "I said we have things to discuss, you scrawny little git." Imagine my surprise when he wheeled around and planted his foot in my groin. Down I went, and away he went, running home. As soon as I could, I got up and gave chase, quickly catching up to him as he scuttled through the house's gates. This is where things began to get weird. As soon as he saw me racing towards him, he stopped running. He placed that strange book on top of a nearby privet hedge and stood watching me approach. The house was close enough so even he could have got to it before I reached him, but he waited for me. I slowed down, sensing something strange. I wasn't to be disappointed either. "Ah, McGrath," he said in a strangely strong and self-assured voice, quite unlike his usual whining tone. "I'm afraid the tables have been turned. You see, I have discovered something that will put you in your place and assure me the hand of Miss Reed." He inclined his head to the book. With his last words I decided to forego talking to him and pound his head in. I went to leap at him, but was stopped dead in my tracks. "You see, that tome is an ancient grimoire, and do you know what, McGrath? It's magical formulae work." I was worried now. For some reason I couldn't move. I just stood in front of Magestone, my body perfectly relaxed while my mind seethed with rage. My paralysis was so complete I couldn't speak or even move my eyes. "I have been giving this some thought, McGrath. Since I found this volume some weeks ago, you need not know where, I realized I could rid myself of your loutish working-class presence once and for all. But killing you? No, that just wouldn't do. No, what I have in mind for you is something longer-lasting, and doubtless humiliating for you." As he had been talking I could see his body grow slightly, his frame filled out with more muscle, becoming more defined, while his skin lost that pasty corpse-like pallor, becoming healthier. Soon he had become an idealized version of himself. He looked to be equal to my 6 feet in height. Even his movements were more confident, while I felt weaker, somehow drained. Even my clothing seemed somehow baggier, ill-fitting on my body. "You don't have a hope, McGrath, you boorish prig. I have knowledge that allows me to shape reality around me, as you can see. Follow me, your turn is about to come." Suddenly I began moving, following Magestone like some dog as he led me up to the house. He took me through the house, up to the first floor and into a large bedroom, decorated in soft pastels. Dolls, stuffed toys and other girlish items populated the room, and on the bed, in pride of place, lay a small teddy bear. "Welcome to your new home, McGrath. Now turn and face the mirror." I was really scared by this point. Just what was this madman planning, and why had he told me that this room, obviously a little girl's room, was to be my new home? Unable to resist his commands, I turned and stared into a full-length mirror that was affixed to the door of a wardrobe. My reflection was my first shock. Gone were my hard-won muscles, my body was now thin and undeveloped, where once my skin had a healthy coloring, it was now a sickly pale, as if I had rarely been out in the open sunshine. Somehow Magestone had stolen my strength and health, but this was nothing to what was to come. As I stared at my reflection, I could see myself begin to shrink, slowly at first, but with increasing speed. And as I shrank, other changes took place. My face was remodeling itself, and I watched and felt the bones and flesh shift painlessly as my face changed, until a stranger's face gazed out of the mirror at me. I watched in fearful amazement as my green eyes turned sky blue and my close-cropped dark brown hair shifted to golden blonde and cascaded over my now slender shoulders. My clothes hid the rest of the changes, but I could feel my manhood slowly contract, pulling itself inside my body and taking my testicles with it. And still I shrunk. Now I could see my new face in the right context. I had the cute button nose, big sky blue eyes and innocent rosebud lips of a pretty little girl. I could feel my body beneath my grossly oversized clothes. It was real. Magestone had transformed me into a little girl. I couldn't have been much more than 5 years old. I felt weak, helpless and very afraid. Magestone moved behind me, towering over my tiny body. My head was a few inches lower than his belt buckle. Looking down at me, he muttered to himself, "No, no. This won't do at all." Suddenly my clothes began to shift. Scared and unable to move, all I could do was watch as my old male clothing rippled and transformed, pulling itself up my tiny body until I was clothed in a pale pink summer dress, matching socks and Mary Jane's. Then my hair began to move, soft pink ribbons appeared and soon my blonde hair was neatly arranged in long bunches either side of my head, held in place by the ribbons. The rest flowed down my back, completing the image of an innocent 5-year-old girl. "There. All done," Magestone said, obviously delighted with his handiwork. "Face me," he commanded, and unwillingly I obeyed. I had to really crane my neck to meet his gaze, but as I did, I was transfixed, mesmerized. Magestone grinned down at me, obviously pleased with his handiwork. "In case you're wondering, the spell I used has not merely altered your body, it has reshaped reality. Now the world knows you as a 5-year-old little girl. And tomorrow the body of Vince McGrath will be found near the main road, apparently hit by a car and left to die." He smiled down at me, drinking in my misery. "From this moment on you will think of yourself as Jessica Magestone. You are now my 5-year-old half-sister. Although I allow you to retain the memories of your past life, you will think and act exactly like the little girl you now are. Everyone knows you are sweet little Jessica now, so if you try to tell anyone what has happened to you, they'll only think it the overactive imagination of a little girl." As he spoke, I felt something in my mind change. I tried to think of myself as Vince McGrath, but I couldn't. Even though I could remember being a man, I could only think of myself as 5-year-old Jessica Magestone. As this realization sunk in, I felt tears well up in my eyes as Magestone looked down at me in triumph. "Now, tell me who you are, and who I am." I tried to tell him I was Vince McGrath and he was a sick little creep, but all I could say was what he wanted me to. "I'm Jessica, you're my big brother Gerald," I said, cringing inside at my cute little voice. "And you like being a little girl, don't you?" Again my mind betrayed me and I nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Gerald, girls are better than smelly little boys." Laughing, Magestone said, "That's a good little girl. Here, I have a lollipop for you." Suddenly I found I could move, but as much as I wanted to hit Magestone then, I knew I'd regret it. I had to bide my time. "Thank you, Gerald," I said, smiling up at him, even as my mind was going frantic with the enormity of what he had done to me. Reaching up, I took the proffered lollipop and promptly began sucking on it happily, enjoying the sweet fruity flavor, despite myself. "My, but you are a pretty little girl, aren't you?" he said, grinning down at me. His comment made me blush with embarrassment, but I also felt a touch of pride at his words, pleased that I was a pretty little girl. "Come along, Jessica. I'm sure Mother doesn't want you staying up here all day playing with your dolls," Magestone said, a note of cruel amusement in his voice. "Okay, But I want to bring Teddy too, I said, climbing onto my bed to grab the stuffed bear, feeling a childish sense of security in holding the stuffed animal. Burning inside with humiliation, I could feel Magestone's amusement at my girlish actions. Taking my tiny hand in his huge one, he left my bedroom, walking down the hallway, with me skipping along beside him just like the little girl I was rapidly becoming as the changes in my mind caught up with my body. As we walked, Magestone said, "With you no longer an obstacle, and myself with my newfound strengths and social skills, I will soon have Miss King's affection, and you will have to watch as I woo her and perhaps marry her." I looked up at him, my stomach churning with emotions and tears once again in my eyes. "No, Gerald, I don't want to be a little girl. Please turn me back. Why are you being so cruel to me?" I said in my cute girlish voice, tears streaming down my face. In a snarling voice, Magestone said, "Because I have the power, my dear little Jessica, I have the power. And you had everything I wanted, strength, confidence, and above all, Miss King. Now I have your strengths, and soon I will have Sarah, while you have the life of a little girl. Just thank your lucky stars that I did not act upon my first idea, or you would find yourself as one of the village whores, or would you prefer that, my dear?" I swallowed hard and shook my head, terrified that he would carry out his threat right then and there. "I thought not. Now dry your eyes. We don't want you seeing Mummy all teary-eyed, do we?" He produced a silk handkerchief and wiped my eyes dry, then made me blow my nose, just like any adult does to small children. "Now come along, Jessica, and let's have no more of your nonsense." Again he took my hand and led me through the house, and again I skipped along beside him, just like any other little girl. He took me to the patio at the rear of the house. And sitting reading on a sun lounger was a beautiful woman. She couldn't have been more than 36, her golden hair was the same shade as mine now was, and tumbled about her shoulders as she reclined. Even from the doorway to the patio I could see her face clearly, and took note of how my own face closely mirrored hers. Surely this couldn't be Magestone's mother. Then I remembered, Magestone's mother had died when he was 10 and his father had married his 26-year-old aide, Jennifer Rowan. There had been quite a scandal about it back then. I remember hearing about it on the national news. From what I had heard when I came to Darkhaven, Magestone's mother had been ill with cancer for years, and at the end she had told his father to marry soon after her death. Apparently she had even suggested his aid, information that had never made it to the national press. And they hounded the couple for 6 or 7 years. As we came out onto the patio, Jennifer looked up, seeing Magestone first. A flash of distaste quickly crossed her face, a look that Magestone apparently missed completely. Then she saw me and her face lit up with a huge smile. As she smiled at me, I felt a deep connection with her, something that Magestone had planted in my mind no doubt, but still a very real thing. I knew instinctively that this woman was now my mother and she would always keep me safe. My new emotions overriding my mind, I let go of Magestone's hand and ran over to Jennifer, unable and unwilling to remove the huge smile on my face. "And how's Mummy's little angel?" she asked me, in that voice reserved for a favorite child. "I'm okay, Mummy," came my reply. Jennifer, my new mother, picked me up and sat me on her knee, giving me a warm hug and kissing my forehead. And at that very moment I felt something fade in my mind. Instinctively I knew that the last vestiges of Vince McGrath had been purged from me. Apart from the memories of my former life, I was now completely Jessica Magestone, and if I were ever to hope of a return to my old life, I had to find and decipher Magestone's grimoire. These thoughts filled me with a kind of panicky fear that quickly faded as I basked in the presence of my new mother. Jennifer must have sensed this in me, because she looked down at me and asked, "Is something wrong, Jessie? Has Gerald been cruel to you?" I glanced over to Magestone, who gave me a warning glance that I'm certain Jennifer missed and replied, "No, Mummy, I was just playing with my dollies and Gerald said I should come and play outside." "Well, you just sit with Mummy, it's nearly 7 o'clock, and it will soon be time for little girls like you to be in bed." And she was right too. I was exhausted as I sat there, I could feel myself becoming drowsier. As I lay in her lap, I listened to her talking to Magestone as I slowly drifted off to sleep. It was obvious, even to my 5-year-old mind, that she didn't care much for her stepson, but he obviously doted on her and was more than a little afraid of her too. "Are you sure you haven't been tormenting her, Gerald? Don't deny that you don't. You've been seen by the servants on a few occasions making her cry." Well, that is, not on this occasion, Mother. I have been a good older brother. I even gave her a lollipop before bringing her down to you." "Harumph, I bet it was a bribe to stop her from crying before you brought her down." As they talked, I drifted off to sleep, lulled by the security of my new mother's presence. Chapter 2. A new life. Sunlight streaming through pastel pink curtains woke me. Drowsily I lay there, glad that my insane nightmare was over, and then I felt the teddy bear I still held in my tiny arms, and the sensation of my long blonde hair moving with my head. It was all true. I was the victim of Magestone's insane jealousy of me, and I was now trapped in the identity and body of his 5-year-old half-sister. My 5-year-old mind was overcome with the sorrow of my loss, and I began to cry like the little girl I was. Hearing the door opening, I looked up, my weeping subsiding slightly. A young woman entered my room. She was wearing a traditional English nanny's uniform that did little to hide her well-proportioned figure. If I had still been my old male self, she would have aroused me, but as I was, I only saw her as a source of comfort. "Why the tears, princess? Did you have a nasty nightmare?" she asked me, sympathy flowing from her. I really wanted to tell her the truth, ask her for help, but I knew she just wouldn't believe me. It seemed like Magestone had been telling the truth when he said he could alter reality around him. Besides, his magic had robbed me of an adult vocabulary. So I simply nodded and said yes. "Well, don't you fret, princess. Fiona's here now and I'll chase all those nasty dreams away," she said, thankfully giving me her name. Fiona lifted me gently out of my bed and held me to her and rocked me until my sobs subsided. There, princess. Those nasty dreams can't hurt you. Now let's give you your morning bath and get you ready for infant school." Fiona carried me from my room to the bathroom, humming a song as she walked. Feeling safe in her arms, I dozed, waking again as she tickled my feet to wake me. Giggling, I looked around. The bathroom we were in was big enough to fit the front room of my former parents' house in. It had a definite feminine feel to it, obviously designed by or for a woman. The bath itself was a white porcelain tub, circular in shape and crowned by gold-plated taps. The whole room screamed wealth and status. Setting me down on the floor, Fiona removed my nightclothes and ran a bath for me, leaving me to see my new body for the first time. Gazing into the mirror showed me with absolute certainty that I was not Vince McGrath anymore. There was no trace of anything even slightly male about my tiny shape, and my face was a 5-year-old version of Jennifer's, and even I could recognize that it was a little girl who looked out of my eyes. I was distracted from my inspection when Fiona picked me up and with a good-natured shout of "we" put me in the bath. Quickly and thoroughly bathing me, Fiona then played with me, splashing me with water and playing with my bath toys. After a half-hour of fun, which raised my spirits totally, she lifted me out and dried me off, using a hairdryer on my long golden hair. Finally declaring herself satisfied with my cleanliness, she wrapped me in a tiny pink bathrobe and walked me back to my bedroom, with me skipping happily along beside her. In the space of an hour I had formed a deep attachment to this woman. I knew I could trust her with my safety as much as I could Jennifer. She dressed me in a pink and white striped dress and white socks, and then had me sit on the chair in front of my vanity mirror. "Now then, young lady," she said in a mock-serious voice that had me giggling, "how would you like your hair today? Can you do it like it was yesterday, Fiona?" I asked, wanting to make a good impression on her. She smiled and nodded, combing my hair out, then arranging it before using some pink ribbons to hold the bunches in place. As she was finishing up, we heard the unmistakable sound of Magestone walking down the hallway to the bathroom. I caught a distasteful look on Fiona's face as she looked towards the door. "Fiona, don't you like Gerald?" I asked, hating the cute little voice that Magestone had given me. Never you mind your pretty little head, princess, she replied, smiling at me. Sensing I had a possible ally in Fiona, I pressed the point. It's okay, Fiona, I won't tell on you, I said and then whispered to her, I think Gerald is scary. You do not, you little fibber, she said, laughing. I do, he's nasty to me, and sometimes he makes me cry. She looked at me, considering for a moment, then smiled again and said, all right, princess. But this is our secret. I don't like your half-brother. He has nastiness in him that makes me feel bad, and I don't think he is to be trusted. Mummy doesn't like Gerald either, I said, sharing something Fiona probably already knew. Oh, I know that, princess, your mummy doesn't hide her feelings about Gerald, I smiled inwardly. I had my ally. While my mother would always protect me, she couldn't be there all the time. Fiona would as a nanny always be near me, perhaps I could use her protection to find a way to regain my old life? There, all done, she said, helping me down off the chair I had been sitting on. Selecting a bright red pair of Mary Janes, she quickly put them on my feet, securing them to my comfort, and then took me by the hand down to the dining hall for breakfast. As we sat to eat breakfast, Jennifer fussed over me, telling me how pretty I was and making me laugh with silly jokes. Magestone on the other hand cast me hateful glances, obviously detesting the fact that I was happily the center of attention. Had he left my mind intact, he would have thoroughly succeeded in making me miserable. But with the mind of a 5-year-old girl, I was quick to recover my spirits. Breakfast done, it was time for me to be taken to my infant school. I was nervous about going, but was successful in hiding it. Kissing Jennifer and Magestone goodbye, an action I knew he had forced me to do, I followed Fiona out to the front of the house and she placed me in a child seat attached to the back seats of a light blue Renault Laguna hatchback. And we set off, driving out of the house grounds and down the main road into Darkhaven Village. Being a 5-year-old girl, my view of the world outside the car was limited by my height. But, as we drove down the main road, I saw the unmistakable sight of an ambulance parked up on the opposite side of the forested road. As we came closer, Fiona slowed down to pass the ambulance and I strained to see the scene. The ambulance crew were lifting the body of a man on the gurney. He was obviously dead, blood covered his chest and the side of his head. His head shifted as he was moved, giving me a clear view of his face, and my heart froze in my chest. I was looking straight into my own dead eyes. Despite the blood and smashed-in cheek, I still recognized my old male face. The corpse even had the same clothes I had been wearing yesterday. I felt sick to my stomach. I was truly dead as Vince McGrath now. As far as the world was concerned, I had been the victim of a hit-and-run driver. I tried to hold in my tears, but I couldn't, and I began to cry, mourning the loss of my old life, everything I had been or had. Fiona stopped the car after the ambulance was out of sight and took me out of the child's seat, holding me in her arms and rocking me gently until my tears subsided. There, princess. I know. The poor man is in heaven with Jesus now. Don't you fret, Fiona said, soothing me with her voice. It was at that exact moment that I began to truly hate Magestone, not just for what he had done to me, but to my parents, family and friends too. No matter what I had to do, I would find a way of exposing him for what he was and taking my revenge upon him. Drying my eyes and kissing me on the forehead, Fiona asked me if I wanted to go home. I told her no. So she put me back in my child's seat and we continued on to Darkhaven Village. Arriving at the village infant school, Fiona helped me out of the car and took me by the hand and led me through the main gate. Darkhaven Village Infant School was larger than I expected. As we walked through the playground, some of the girls and 1 or 2 of the boys waved or said hello to me. Not knowing any of their names, I could just wave back and smile shyly. Seeing the world with the mind of a 5-year-old girl, I felt the nervousness of starting a new school for the second time that day and clung to Fiona for security. She smiled down at me and ruffled my hair, making me feel a little better. We arrived outside the headmaster's office and Fiona told me to wait outside while she talked with Mr. Darby, who I assumed to be the headmistress. While Fiona was in the office, I looked at my surroundings. The hallway was gigantic to me. The walls were painted in soft blue and white with friendly-looking animal pictures and cartoon characters. There were a number of classroom doors in the hallway, their handles set at a height I could easily reach. Low-hung coat hooks were fixed to the wall, empty for the most part, this being summer. As I stood looking around, I was shoved from behind and went sprawling on the floor. I could feel the tears welling up inside me, my child's mind reacting to the sudden shock, until I heard the laughter. Standing up, I saw two boys. One was a skinny kid, about my height, but the other one was huge. He was easily a foot taller than his friend or me. My head was level with his chest, so I had to look up slightly to meet his gaze. Hard brown eyes stared at me from a chubby and mean-spirited face as he said, "Look, Jessica is going to cry." That did it. I may have been given the mind and body of a 5-year-old girl, but my personality was still very much the same. I decided I was going to give this overgrown bully the beating he deserved, and I still remembered my lifetime of experience with fights. Before I got the chance, however, the door to the headmaster's office opened and a large imposing man appeared, accompanied by Fiona. Even the bully and his friend shut up. This was obviously Mr. Darby, a man in his 40s, by his look. Dressed in a no-nonsense suit, he exuded authority. As a man I would have felt it, as a little girl, he was overpowering to me. "What is the meaning of this unseemly behavior outside of my office?" he asked in a loud and obviously angry voice. I could see the huge boy and his companion pale visibly at his anger, even I felt shaken by it. A girl who I hadn't noticed before said, "Mr. Darby." Angus and Peter pushed Jessica over. "Thank you, Melissa, you run along now," Mr. Darby told the girl in a much softer tone. Mr. Darby turned to the bully and his friend. "Now, what have you two to say for yourself?" he demanded of them in a commanding tone. Both of the boys bowed their heads, trying to hide their humiliation. They were drawing a crowd of children. I could hear them talking and snickering amongst themselves. "Don't you think it's cowardly for two 7-year-old boys to bully a 5-year-old girl?" he asked them, causing both boys to blush with humiliation and me to grin at them in triumph. Receiving no immediate answer, Mr. Darby said, "Jessica has had a nasty experience this morning, and you young hooligans decide to make her morning a little worse." Sighing, he finished with, "You two little monsters will come to my office after school and I shall have your parents in to hear about your shameful behavior, but for now I think you should both apologize to Jessica and ask for her forgiveness, now." Swallowing hard, the smaller of the two mumbled his apology and asked for my forgiveness. The larger boy gave me a vicious look that held the promise of more to come, but even he offered his apology, even though it sounded like he had to force the words out of his mouth. I accepted their apologies, grinning triumphantly at them, and they fled down the hallway towards the playground, the laughter of the other children following them. As the children dispersed, Fiona and Mr. Darby took me into the office and sat me down on a sofa, Fiona sitting beside me. Mr. Darby returned to his desk and looked at me with concern visible on his face. "Well, Jessica, you had a nasty experience earlier this morning, I hear. Are you sure you don't want to go back home?" he asked me. "No thank you, Mr. Darby. I want to come to school," I replied, my voice still showing all the emotion I had experienced that morning. He and Fiona exchanged glances, then he smiled down at me and said, "Well, you're a brave little girl, you run along and play now, the bell won't be ringing for a half-hour yet." Smiling, I said, "Thank you, Mr. Darby," and climbed down from the sofa, and kissing Fiona goodbye, I left the office and went out into the playground, determined to gain control over my nervousness. During the half-hour before the bell rang, I wandered aimlessly about the playground. Other little girls would talk to me, asking what had happened to me this morning. I told them just what I had seen on the road, like any small child would have. This tale made me the center of attention as the other children gathered round, wanting to hear every detail. My little conversations helped me out. I managed to find out the names of the other children and who my teacher was. For some reason Magestone, despite all his magic, had not given me the memories of Jessica's 5 years of life. Was this a mistake on his part, or perhaps a sign that his magic wasn't all he said it was? Finally the bell rang, and I walked with a group of girls I had found to be my school friends, who were all showing sympathy for my scary ride to school. And then we were in my class. I sat with my newfound friends and our topics of conversation ranged from children's television shows to which boy was the cutest, or the smelliest. I soon found I was losing myself in the childish conversations, joining in as readily as the other little girls. Presently our teacher, Miss Williams, entered the class and our lessons began. For the rest of the morning we were taught maths and English. To my amazement I found that I was having as much difficulty with these subjects as my classmates. I obviously had as much knowledge as any other 5-year-old. The rest of the day at school passed with no incident. I completely lost myself, becoming a little girl in every way. I played with the other girls at playtimes, joined in their conversations and shared their jokes. For a time I totally forgot about my predicament, that is until it was time to go home. Chapter 3 Sarah moves and I waited outside the school with the other kids to be picked up by Fiona, chatting with my friends about the day's events, but it was Magestone's Hummer that arrived instead. My heart sank as I saw him climbing out of his car and he obviously saw my dismay, because he began to grin at me. "Come along, Jessica, we haven't got all day," he called over to me. Reluctantly I approached his Hummer. Magestone stood, chafing at my lack of speed. He helped me up into the rear passenger seat, firmly securing me in a child's seat and climbed back behind the wheel to drive off. I waved at the girls who were now my friends and we left the school, driving at a sedate speed back up the main road towards Darkhaven House. "Well, my dear," he said, cruelty evident in his voice, "I saw you chatting with your little friends. I think you're secretly happy that I did this to you. Did you enjoy your day at school as a little girl?" "Yes, Gerald," I said in a small voice. He laughed at me, and I felt totally humiliated and helpless. "This is wonderful," he said, having my most hated enemy ensorcelled and trapped in the life of my own little sister. "Oh, you might like to know, I have spent the day consoling poor Sarah over her loss. She has agreed to spend a few days at the house. Purely to help her get over her beau's tragic death, of course," he told me in an offhand manner. "So we're going to pick her up and bring her with us. I'm sure she'll be delighted to meet you, as I'm sure you'll be overjoyed for her to see you as a pretty little girl." I felt a helpless anger fill me, almost pushing aside my humiliation as Magestone laughed at me again. Magestone drove the car past the gates leading to the house and continued on towards the university, taking the car into the residential buildings. We stopped outside of the dormitory where Sarah lived and Magestone got out of the Hummer, released me from the child's seat and lifted me onto the pavement. Taking my hand he led me towards the dormitory building. I was feeling very uncomfortable about this and dragged my feet in a childish attempt to delay the inevitable. "Oh, do stop dawdling, Jessica. Pick up your feet, girl," he snapped at me, irritated by my deliberately slow pace. As we approached the building, 2 girls came walking out of the main door. I recognized them immediately, Amanda Mason and Claire Black, 2 close friends of Sarah and me. Even though I knew they had no idea of who I really was, I felt incredibly embarrassed being in their presence and tried to hide behind Magestone. Of course he held me out in full view. The girls came up to us, and they were obviously just going to pass Magestone when they spotted me. They immediately came straight over, smiling at me and almost ignoring Magestone. "Oh, aren't you a pretty little girl? What's your name, sweetheart?" Amanda asked me. I was so embarrassed I couldn't respond, and tried again to hide. "Ah, she's shy," cooed Claire, beaming at me in the way women do with small children. Without even glancing at him Amanda asked Magestone, "Who is she?" "She's adorable." What was making the situation worse for me was that before I had met Sarah I had dated Amanda, and now all I was as far as she was concerned was a pretty little girl. "This is my half-sister Jessica. Say hello to Amanda, Jessica." Magestone was well aware of my history with Amanda, and I could feel his amusement at my humiliation flowing out of him like a noxious gas. Looking at my feet and trying to hide unsuccessfully behind Magestone, I mumbled a hello. "You're a very pretty little girl, Jessica," Amanda told me, unknowingly making me feel even worse. "How old are you?" "I'm 5, I mumbled. "You're so cute," Claire said, joining in with Amanda. "I like your hair." "Thank you," I said, feeling mortified. "Do you have a boyfriend yet, Jessica?" Claire asked, making me blush furiously with embarrassment. "Don't be daft, Claire, she's only 5, Amanda said. "Well, they grow up fast these days," Claire responded. "Jessica still thinks boys are nasty, ladies. She's still too young to be interested in such things." Amanda, still looking at me and smiling, said, "You're right, Gerald. But I bet she'll have the boys falling over themselves to go out with her when she's older." "Oh, of that I have no doubt, ladies. She's the very image of her mother when she was this age," Magestone replied, ruffling my hair. Their comments made me blush again, and I kept my head down trying to hide my embarrassment. Claire said, "Well, we have to be going. Gerald, it was nice to see you." Then she looked down at me and said, "And it was nice to meet you, Jessica. Goodbye, sweetheart." And both Amanda and Claire bent down to kiss me on the cheek, both commenting on how cute I was. Magestone said his goodbyes to the two women and watched them walk off. When he was sure they were out of earshot, he looked down at me and in a derisive tone said, "Well now, Jessica, I expect that was quite unpleasant for you. But never fear, there is far worse to come, oh yes." He then led me into the dormitory building and up to the reception. The main foyer of the dormitory was busy with people moving out to go home for the holidays or just relaxing. People wandering in and out, or sitting watching TV. Almost everybody I saw was someone I knew, and I desperately hoped that I wouldn't have to endure another experience like the one outside. I couldn't overhear what Magestone was saying, but after about a minute of talking he tugged my hand and said, "Come along, Jessica." Then he led me up the stairs and straight to Sarah's dorm room. Magestone knocked upon the door and waited. After a few seconds the door was opened by Sarah. She looked as though she had been crying. Her eyelids were red and puffy, and tear stains streaked her cheeks. She smiled weakly at Magestone and invited us in. She knelt down before me and with a sad smile she said, "Hello, I'm Sarah. You must be Gerald's little sister, Jessica. He told me all about you, but he didn't say how pretty you are." Forcing down the humiliation of having my girlfriend seeing me as a 5-year-old girl, I nodded and asked her why she had been crying, although I knew the answer well enough. She said that her boyfriend had been run over by someone in a car and now he was in heaven. Not saying anything else, I hugged her with true sympathy, catching a flash of amusement on Magestone's face as I did so. My heart went out to her. I only wished I could tell her of the cruel trick Magestone had played on reality itself, that I was Vince and I wasn't dead. But I knew all she'd hear was the fanciful imaginings of a 5-year-old girl. So I kept quiet and let the grown-ups talk. Sarah smiled at me and asked if I would like to watch some cartoons while she talked with Magestone. Knowing I had little choice in the matter, I said yes. Sarah smiled at me and said, "Well, I bought a Princess Barbie DVD for my niece, she's 5 too. I don't think she'll mind a good little girl like you watching her DVD first." Cringing inside at the way she spoke to me, and the prospect of having to sit and endure a little girl's movie, I nonetheless smiled at her and said thank you. She turned on the TV and put the DVD in the player. While she was setting up the movie for me to watch, she said, "Me and Gerald have to put some of my things in his car and have a chat about stuff. You watch the telly and be a good little girl for me?" I nodded and said thank you again, even though I had no intention of watching the damned thing when they weren't around. However, things didn't happen the way I wanted them. Instead of becoming quickly bored with the inanely childish storyline and overly cute characters, I find myself becoming enthralled by the movie and sat wrapped for the whole hour and 30 minutes, feeling disappointed when the film was over. Sarah and Magestone came back into the dorm room and Magestone sat down beside me. He said, "Jessica, Sarah is coming to live with us for the summer holidays, so you will have to be on your best behavior and don't bother her with your silly games too much." I looked up at Sarah. She'd obviously been crying again, but when she smiled at me she didn't seem as sad. Not trusting myself to speak, all I could do was nod my head in response to Magestone. 15 minutes later we were back at Darkhaven House. Magestone had some servants take Sarah's bags up to a guest room and I walked in between them, each holding one of my hands. I kept talking to Sarah, asking her questions I already knew the answers to in an attempt to keep her mind of her grief over my magically faked death. She seemed to appreciate the distraction and we chatted about nonsensical stuff as we went into the house. Entering the family room I spotted Fiona and Jennifer sitting on a Georgian-style sofa, drinking tea and talking. As soon as I saw her my 5-year-old emotions took over and I ran up to her. "Mommy!" I shouted and mindful of the hot cup of tea in her hands, hugged her. Behind me I heard Sarah remark how adorable I was. But it didn't bother me at that point, I was firmly under the control of my little girl's mind. Magestone introduced Sarah to Jennifer and Fiona, who, while they greeted Magestone with a familiar contempt, welcomed Sarah into the house. Then Magestone suggested that he should show Sarah her room, and led her out of the family room and upstairs. Then Jennifer turned her attention to me. Putting her tea down she picked me up and sat me on her lap. "I hear you had a nasty shock this morning, darling," she said. I nodded and told her all about it, becoming tearful as I relived the incident. Naturally, Jennifer mistook my distress as a delayed shock to the scene I had witnessed and hugged me close to her, whispering soothing words in my ear. After Jennifer was sure I was feeling better, she suggested I go and show Sarah my bedroom. I beamed at her and kissed her cheek, then scrambled off of her knee and raced upstairs. I found Sarah and Magestone quickly, just as if I knew the house like it had been my home for my life. They were in one of the south bedrooms. As I walked in, it looked as if Magestone was getting ready to make his move on Sarah. They were sitting on the bed, talking and drawing closer to each other. I knew I had to break the moment. "Sarah," I almost shouted with girlish excitement, "Mummy asked me to show you my bedroom." I grabbed her hand and began to lead her out of the guest room and along the corridor. "Jessica," Magestone said, irritated at my interruption, "it's quite rude, not to mention unladylike, to interrupt a private conversation." "But Mummy said." "Mother would likely have imagined you would be polite enough to wait until we had finished talking, young lady," he said in that tone reserved for disobedient children. His tone of voice and his size were more than enough to dominate me, and I lapsed into silence. Then Sarah spoke up, "Gerald, she's only a child, and she's your little sister. For God's sake, show some latitude." Magestone stopped talking before the words could reach his mouth. He looked like all his responses and comments had jammed in his throat, blocking it so no words could get through. Sarah smiled down at me and said, "Come on then, Jessie, I'd love to see your room." When my back was turned to Magestone, I grinned at my little victory and hoped he wouldn't take it out on Sarah, or me, for that matter. Sarah looked back at Magestone and said, "Oh, Gerald. I think you left one of my cases in your car. Be a darling and fetch it for me, would you?" Magestone eagerly took the offered bone and hurried to get the missing case. For all his stolen social skills, he still didn't have a clue. Despite having the mind of a 5-year-old girl, or maybe because I had a girl's mind, I still knew that Sarah had sent him after the case to be rid of him. He still had no chance of dating her. I happily skipped along beside Sarah, taking her back down the corridor to my room, exited to be with her again, even if I was a little girl and she thought me dead. Once inside my room, I began showing her my dolls and animals. Somehow I knew all about them, what their names were, which one liked which and who were enemies. I thought about this for a second, but dismissed it as unimportant, as children do. While I was opening my doll's house for Sarah, I failed to notice her get up and lock the door, being too distracted by my dolls. When she knelt down beside me, she looked at me with a strange expression on her face. Worried that Magestone might have interfered with her mind, I nervously asked, "What's wrong, Sarah?" Her expression turned into a mixture of sympathy and sadness. "Oh, Vince," she said, "is it really you in there?" Her words hit me like a hammer to the back of my head. I just stared at her in shock. Then she took me in her arms and hugged me tight, almost stopping me from breathing. "Oh, my poor baby," she said, almost crying, "this is almost worse than if you were really dead." I thought he was a madman, but he was telling me the truth. "How did you know? Who told you?" I asked, amazed that she knew who I was. She took a deep breath, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Last night, I think it was about 6 o'clock, I was in my room, studying." She smiled weakly at me and continued, "Well, all of a sudden the lights dimmed down, and when they came back on there was this man standing in front of me, all dressed in this pale white robe, like a druid or something." I nearly died on the spot. As it was, I jumped back so hard, I tripped over my chair. I would have smacked my head off the fireplace, but he stopped me falling, with a wave of his hand. She paused, collecting her thoughts. "Well, I was in shock, I can tell you. But he placed me back on my chair, then he told me not to be afraid. His voice calmed me instantly, it was amazing." "And then what?" I asked, my childish mind becoming impatient with the delays. "Oh, well, he told me that Gerald had found a book he shouldn't have, a magic book. His father had it hidden in a secret room somewhere in the university library because he didn't want Gerald to inherit it. He knew his son was too unstable to have access to the book's power. But he did find it, and by accident, too." She paused for breath and I looked at her, impatiently, waiting for her to continue. "Well, he told me what Gerald had done to you. At first I didn't believe him, and was about to tell him as much. But he showed me. He simply touched my temples and it was as if I were standing in the mirror, watching you change. When he had shown me, he told me that he belonged to one of 2 families that were charged by Charlemagne himself to keep the book safe, because it can't be destroyed. He said that you were his first victim, and also that he had killed a tramp with the book's magic to falsify your death. Vince, he told me that we have to get the book from him, that way his magic will desert him and they can deal with him." I was intensely interested in the man Sarah had spoke of and asked her what he looked like. As she described the robed man, I stared at her, shocked. The man she was describing was Mr. Darby, my infant school headmaster. Chapter 4: The Guardians of the Book. I sat there, in front of my doll's house, staring up at Sarah for what seemed an eternity. The thought that my nightmare could be over sometime soon, that Sarah knew who I was, that I wasn't dead, and a chance to exact some measure of justice from Magestone whirled around in my mind. The sound of someone coming down the corridor snapped me from my thoughts. Sarah jumped up and went to unlock the door. She barely had time to return to my side when Magestone entered the room. I pretended to show Sarah where my dolls lived, glancing up at Magestone and faking a smile. Returning my smile, he turned to Sarah and asked, "Would you mind if we step into the hallway and talk, Sarah?" Giving me a quick look, Sarah nodded and stood up. Magestone looked at me and said, "You wait here, Jessica. Play with your dolls while the grown-ups talk." Although he said it in a pleasant voice, I knew he was enjoying reminding me of my new status as a little girl and his power over me. So they stepped out into the hallway and spoke in low voices. Magestone kept the door open and cast the occasional glance at me. I had no choice but to play with my dolls while they talked. And as I did, I quickly became absorbed with my toys, losing all interest in Sarah and Magestone. Just like my day at infant school, I was perfectly happy doing little girl's things. Deep within me, I knew that the transformation of my mind into a true 5-year-old girl's was completed when I had seen my dead body being placed on the ambulance gurney this morning. In a lot of ways, Vince McGrath was truly dead. In the background, Magestone and Sarah talked. I could hear them, but I was more interested in my doll's house. That is, until I heard Sarah say, "Gerald, no," in a loud voice. I looked up. Magestone was trying to force a kiss from her. Sarah was struggling vainly against him and swearing at him loudly. He cut off her yells by clamping his mouth over hers and pinning her against the door jamb. Anger flooded me and I jumped up, my dolls forgotten. Running over to them, I kicked Magestone hard. My Mary Jane's cracking against his shin bone audibly. "Leave her alone!" I yelled at the top of my tiny voice. Magestone shrieked in pain and clutched at his wounded shin, hopping on one foot. Sarah backed away into my bedroom, watching him fearfully. "You," he growled, releasing his injured leg and advancing on me. "Even now, even as you now are, you still stand in my way." I backed away from him, terrified of what he could do to me. Then I felt Sarah behind me, her hands rested on my shoulders for a second, then she stepped in front of me. "What are you going to do, Gerald? Are you going to beat a helpless little girl? You're not a man, you're scum." Peeking out from behind Sarah, I saw Magestone stop his advance and stand in front of Sarah, speechless with rage, his face red and veined. "Yes, Gerald, what are you going to do?" It was Jennifer's voice. Stepping out from behind Sarah, I saw Jennifer, Fiona and some of the house staff I had not yet met, but somehow knew very well. Giving Magestone a wide berth, I ran to Jennifer, teary-eyed, and hugged her tightly, my eyes tight shut as I cried softly with relief. I felt her hand stroking my hair, calming me. She spoke to Magestone again, saying, "Well, Gerald, you have two choices now. Either you can go now and move into the guest cottage in the village, or I can call the police and have you arrested for attempted rape and for threatening my daughter with violence. As you can see, they have several witnesses." "But mother," he began, returning to his whining tone. "Don't you mother me, you spineless worm. Your father was always afraid this day would come. So he left me the power to veto your inheritance in part, or in full, including the title. Well, you have helped me reach a decision. As soon as you leave, I'm going straight on the phone to my lawyers. I'm taking the title from you. When Jessica is old enough, she will inherit it, and all title to your father's lands. Be grateful I'm leaving you with your trust fund." There was complete silence for what seemed like forever, then Magestone spoke. "Very well, mother, That's Lady Darkhaven to you, Gerald," Jennifer said, in a voice as cold as an Arctic wind. I looked up at Magestone from the safety of my mother's embrace. He looked like he had been kicked in the groin. His face was pale and sweat beaded his forehead. Slowly he regained his composure and continued, "Lady Darkhaven then. If you would allow me to collect some items from my room, I shall be on my way." He made to leave, but Jennifer said, "No. First you will apologize to both Miss King and to Jessica, then James and Martin will escort you to your car. You are not a part of this family any longer, Gerald, nor are you welcome in my home any longer." Gathering his courage, Magestone turned to Sarah and, in a shaky voice said, "Miss King, I humbly apologize for my inexcusable behavior. I know there is absolutely no excuse for what I did, and I only hope you can find it in your heart to, if not forgive me, then merely accept my apology." Sarah took a deep breath, fear still evident in her eyes, and nodded silently. "Jessica," he said to me, "I apologize for frightening you. And for trying to hurt you, would you accept my apology?" Frowning at him, I stuck out my tongue, childishly showing my contempt of him, and earning a sharp smack on my rear. "Jessica," Jennifer said in that shocked tone parents use when a young child does something they shouldn't. "That's very rude. Not to mention unladylike. Now remember your manners," she told me. Looking down at my feet, I mumbled I was sorry and said I accepted Magestone's apology. Jennifer moved me aside and made room for Magestone to pass us. James and Martin, two large and powerfully built men, each took an arm and half carried him down the hall and out of the house. Picking me up, Jennifer smiled at me and kissed my forehead, then took a handkerchief and dried my face. "My poor little angel," she said to me. "Well, he's gone now and he can't hurt you anymore." Turning to Sarah, she said, "I'm sorry about Gerald's actions, and I'm very grateful that you were prepared to protect my daughter, Miss King. You're quite welcome to stay as long as you wish. In fact, I'd advise you to. It wouldn't be safe for you to return to the dormitories for a while. Gerald has an unhealthy mind and is quite vindictive. Sarah relaxed visibly, and after a few moments she said, "Please, call me Sarah." "And thank you, I'd love to stay for as long as I'm welcome." We spent the remainder of the evening in the family room, the adults talking while I watched Playhouse Disney. I had been badly shaken by the events in my room, and couldn't shake all my fear. When 7 o'clock came round, Fiona took me for my evening bath, trying unsuccessfully to lay my fears to rest while she bathed me. Dressed in a pink night dress, I returned to the family room to say good night to Jennifer and Sarah, but I was that shaken, I refused to go to bed, crying and pleading to be allowed to stay with them. After my outburst, Jennifer relented and I was allowed to stay downstairs. It wasn't long before I drifted in and out of sleep, feeling safe with my mother, Fiona and Sarah nearby to protect me. I was awoken by Jennifer gently shaking me and softly calling my name. Drowsily I looked up at her, still in the family room, but the TV had been turned off and Sarah was looking at me with a somewhat amused look on her face. "It's time to go to bed, Angel," she said to me gently. "I'm scared, Mummy," I said. "Can I sleep in your bed?" I caught Sarah stifling a chuckle, but I didn't care. I was a scared little girl who wanted her mummy. "Of course, sweetheart," Jennifer said, picking me up. Holding me in her arms, she turned to Sarah and said good night, then carried me up the stairs and across the hallway to the master bedroom. Her bedroom was maintained in a classic style. Oak paneling adorned the walls, while one or two portraits were hung to add variety. The furnishings were all Georgian or Regency pieces, while a deep pile red carpet covered the floor. The center of the room was dominated by a four-poster bed made of oak, with a pink silk canopy and curtains. She placed me in the bed and pulled the pink silken sheets up to my chin, while she got herself ready for bed. Smiling at her and feeling safe and protected, I drifted off into an untroubled sleep. Someone shaking me gently roused me from my sleep. Drowsily I opened my eyes. Jennifer was standing over me. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said to me, making me smile. "Good morning, Mummy," I replied, yawning. "Well," she said, "since Fiona has the day off, Mummy is going to bath you and get you dressed. Then we can watch cartoons together until it's time for Mummy to take you over to Rachel's house." I was momentarily confused until I remembered it was Saturday, and Rachel, apparently my best friend, was having her 6th birthday today. "But Mummy," I said, "I haven't got Rachel a present." Jennifer smiled down at me and picking me up said, "Well, it's a good job Mummy went into Edinburgh with Fiona yesterday, isn't it?" I smiled and kissed Jennifer, happy that she had bought my gift to Rachel. But I was more concerned with searching Magestone's room. That grimoire had to be in there, somewhere. As Jennifer took me to the bathroom, Sarah emerged from her room, still drowsy with sleep. Noticing Jennifer and me, she brightened up and said good morning. Jennifer put me down while they chatted. I stood and waited for Jennifer, my attention wandering, Sarah's hand ruffling my hair, bringing me back from my daydreaming. Smiling down at me, she said, "Enjoy your bath, Jessica," and wandered down the hall. Bathed and clothed in a soft yellow party dress, Jennifer arranged my hair in long loose pigtails which fell over my chest, securing them with some pink ribbons. Taking me downstairs, Jennifer sat me in the family room to watch cartoons, while she left me to contact the family solicitor and have Magestone taken out of his father's will. I had planned on waiting until she was deeply engrossed in her conversation and then sneaking up into Magestone's room to search for the book. After 5 minutes of Dexter's Lab, I figured Jennifer would be distracted enough for me to sneak up. Climbing down from the sofa, I cracked open the door leading into the hall and checked. Jennifer had her back to me. Easing the door open, I snuck up the stairs and crept along the hallway until I came to Magestone's room. Reaching up, I tried the handle. As luck would have it, the door was unlocked. Gingerly, I opened the door and entered his room. Thick burgundy curtains shut out most of the sunlight, bathing the room in a dull reddish light. The only decorations on the wall were certificates from his public school days in Harrow, awards for academic achievements, and a chart of the solar system. At least 3 bookshelves lined one wall and 2 bookcases stood upon some drawers. A PC sat in the corner of the room on an expensive-looking computer desk. By the look of it, it was state-of-the-art. I began my search, looking under his bed, lifting rugs and examining the books as well as I could. Nothing caught my eye. That left his wardrobe. Opening it wasn't easy for a 5-year-old girl, but I managed, needing to drag the chair at the computer desk over so I could reach the lock. Climbing down from the chair, I opened the door and searched, eventually discovering a false bottom. Now if I could work out how to open it. But I had ran out of time. I could hear Jennifer shouting my name from downstairs. I hurriedly clambered out of the wardrobe, shutting the door, and ran out of the room into the bathroom. When I heard footsteps on the stairs, I flushed the loo and pulled my stool over to the wash basin and made a play of washing my hands. Just as Jennifer walked in, "Jessica," she said, sternly, "have you been in Gerald's room?" "No, Mummy," I said, keeping my back to her. "Oh. Well, why is your party dress dirty?" I blushed, embarrassed at being caught in a lie by my mother, and thinking fast I said, "I'm sorry, Mummy. But I only wanted to look. Gerald never let me in his room before, but he could come into mine whenever he wanted." She looked at me, sternly, and I looked back at her, mustering all the cuteness I could into my look. It must have worked, because her face softened and she said, "Oh well, he doesn't live here anymore. When you get back from Rachel's party, we can look in there together. But right now we're going to have to get you out of that dirty dress." We marched into my room and Jennifer picked out a light pink dress and matching shoes for me. Then she undressed me and put me in the fresh dress and placed the shoes on my tiny feet. Jennifer led me downstairs where we met Sarah, who was coming from the kitchen. She smiled when she saw us. I still felt a twinge of humiliation at her seeing me as a little girl, but much less than before. "And what are you all dressed up for, Jessica?" she asked, using that tone adults always use for small children. Jennifer replied for me, "Oh, Jessica is going to a friend's 6th birthday party today." "She looks so sweet in that dress," Sarah said, making me blush with embarrassment. I knew she was finding my predicament amusing and gave her an angry look. "Well," she said, "it should take her mind off last night's incident with Gerald." Jessica nodded and replied, "Kids are pretty good at bouncing back from stuff like that. I'm just glad he didn't hurt her." Sarah reached down and ruffled my hair and said, "I hope you have a wonderful time at your friend's party, Jessica. I'll just be here all day by myself, so I'll have to find a book to read." The way she emphasized the word book was obviously to let me know she intended to search for Magestone's grimoire. I smiled at her and gave her a quick hug, and then Jennifer said, "Well, we must be going. It may be fashionable for adults to be late, but not 5-year-old girls." Jennifer took me into the kitchen and retrieved a parcel from one of the higher cupboards. It was large, rectangular, and wrapped in bright paper with unicorns and fairies printed on it. Giving the parcel to me, she said, "There, that's from you to Rachel. I'm sure she'll like it." I clutched the parcel to my chest protectively, very curious about what was inside, and had to fight my impulse to open it. Taking me outside, Jennifer put me in a child's seat in her Range Rover, and off we went. As usual, I couldn't see outside of the car because I was too small. Jennifer chatted with me as we drove, telling me how adorable I was and that I was sure to be the prettiest little girl there. She also mentioned that my own 6th birthday was coming up in a few days. It worried me how little her comments upset me. Worse, I actually liked being them. I only hoped there wasn't a point of no return to my transformation, because I knew there was barely anything left of the man that I was in my mind. Jennifer pulled up outside Rachel's home. I could hear the sounds of children and knew we had arrived. Excitement welled up in me at the thought of the party, and all thoughts of my situation were driven from my mind as I waited for Jennifer to come get me out of the child's seat. Clutching Rachel's present, I walked beside Jennifer up to the front door of Rachel's house. We must have been seen because the door opened and a woman who I assumed was Rachel's mother greeted us. Jennifer, Jessica, come in. Rachel's been waiting for you, she said, in a tired but happy voice. Thanks, Mary. If you want a helping hand, I'd be delighted to help, so I can guilt you into helping with Jessica's birthday, Jennifer replied, and both women laughed. We were ushered into the house, which was a scene of excited bedlam as little children played party games, talked or generally enjoyed themselves. Most of the guests were girls, but there were some boys, all of whom I recognized from school and all in my class. Looking round, I spotted Rachel, talking with another girl, Susan, whom I had found to be a longtime friend of Jessica's. Spotting me, Rachel and Susan came bounding over, each talking animatedly. Any adult, especially a man, would have found it impossible to understand the barrage of speech, but as a 5-year-old girl I was well equipped to not only follow the conversation, but join in. I wished Rachel a happy birthday, then presented her with her gift, eager to see what it was. The other kids, seeing a new and unwrapped present, crowded round and began chanting, "Open it, open it." I joined in, the excitement in the room filling me as much as the other children. Rachel tore the wrapping off to reveal a Hannah Montana in concert doll, complete with accessories. Rachel's face was a picture of happy surprise, and I received a hug and a thank you from her. For a whole afternoon my problems and concerns were totally forgotten, even my former life was gone from my mind as I played, chatted and joked with my friends, just like any other little girl. And all too soon it was time to go. After saying my goodbyes and stalling for more time, Jennifer took me home. On the way back she asked, "Did you have a good time, sweetheart?" I nodded and said that I had. I could see her smiling in the rearview mirror. Did Rachel like her present? Yes, Mummy, she said it was just what she wanted. Nigel Phillips said it was rubbish, but he's a boy and silly, I said with conviction. Jennifer chuckled and said, "Well, I know a certain little girl who might just get one of those dolls for her birthday, if she behaves herself." As we drove up to the house Jennifer frowned and I heard her say, "What's that, BA?" She paused, looking at me in the rearview mirror, then stopped the car and pulled out a mobile phone. Straining to see what had caused her to nearly swear in front of me, I caught a glimpse of Maidstone's Hummer parked outside the house. Then I heard Jennifer say, "Hello? Police?" "Yes, this is Lady Darkhaven." There was the unintelligible sound of the person on the other end of the line talking. Then Jennifer said, "My stepson was evicted from the house last night, for personal reasons. I told him he was unwelcome in my home. Well, I'm just returning home after taking my 5-year-old daughter to a birthday party and Gerald's car is parked outside the house." Another garbled voice, then, "Yes, I'd like some police presence to remove him from the property. I think he may well be after a house guest we have staying with us, and I'm worried for the safety of my little girl." The person on the other end of the line spoke. Then Jennifer said, "No, I don't want to press charges at this time, but I wonder, could you keep him in the cells until Monday?" The garbled voice made some comment and then Jennifer said, "Yes, I would consider it a great favor, thank you." 5 minutes, you say? Very well, Jessica and I will wait in my car until you remove him, thank you. She turned to me and said, "Sweetheart, we're going to have to wait here. Gerald is in the house and I've sent for the police." "Is Gerald going to jail, Mummy?" I asked as best as I could with a 5-year-old's vocabulary. "No, dear, the policemen are just going to take him away and tell him to stop bothering us." "Well, they should. Gerald is a nasty man. He hurt Sarah and he was going to hurt me," I said, angry at the memory of the previous night. She reached over and ruffled my hair and said, "Well, Gerald is nasty because Daddy sent him to boarding school and none of the other boys liked him. So he got angry at everyone." I still wasn't convinced and replied, "But he's always mean to me, and he's all grown up now so he should stop being nasty." She smiled at me and said, "I know all about how mean he is to you, Princess, don't you worry. He won't do anything to you again, not while I'm here." Her comment made me wonder, did Jennifer know? Or was I reading more in what she said than I knew? Either way, when she was near me, the tiny shreds of my former life seemed very weak and insubstantial, almost like a dream belonging to someone else. Presently we heard a car approach, and then saw the lights of a police car coming up the drive behind us. It continued on past us and up to the house. 2 large police constables climbed out and entered the house, coming out 15 minutes later with Magestone in handcuffs. By this time Jennifer had unbuckled my child's seat and we were standing outside of the Range Rover, watching the scene. They pushed Magestone into the back of the car and one of the constables walked down the drive to us. When he approached, I saw he had the beginnings of a black eye. Magestone must have hit him. He looked quite angry and obviously was holding it in check. He stopped in front of Jennifer and said, "Lady Darkhaven, I have to inform you as next of kin that your stepson Gerald Magestone is to be formally charged. First, when we entered the house, he was attacking a young lady. I think we got to him in time, she doesn't appear harmed, but we have called for paramedics to examine her. Second, he paused for breath and indicated his eye, he resisted arrest, and struck a police officer going about his duties." Jennifer nodded and said, "Thank you, Constable. I'm sorry Gerald hit you and I hope your eye recovers quickly. And I appreciate your prompt response." The constable nodded and returned to his car. We watched as the police car drove past, Magestone staring out the rear passenger window. As the car drew level with us, he glowered at me with pure hatred and malice, causing me to hide behind Jennifer in fear. After the police had left, Jennifer put me back in the child's seat and we drove the remaining distance to the house. The front door was open and I felt very uneasy about going in, clinging to Jennifer for support. It looked like Magestone had really gone mad. The foyer was littered with smashed ornamentation, ripped up plants, and a few paintings had been torn down from the walls and smashed. There was also some blood, the sight of which forced a gasp from me and made my heart grow icy. Jennifer told me to wait by the car, but I was too scared and concerned for Sarah. So I kept a tight hold of her hand as she searched the house. The destruction downstairs had been limited to the foyer. He had gone upstairs, smashing anything in his path as he went. Strangely enough, he had ignored my room and headed straight for his own. That's where we found Sarah. She was sitting on Magestone's bed, crying softly, her right eye swollen and badly bruised and dried blood trails coming out of her nose. The sight of what he had done to her banished my childish fear, replacing it with sympathy for her and a quiet rage directed at him. His room had been ransacked, there were books everywhere, empty drawers, and even his computer lay in pieces on the floor. I rushed over to Sarah, hugging her tightly, and felt her stroke my hair. Then we heard the paramedics pulling up outside. Jennifer went downstairs to meet them, leaving me with Sarah. Waiting until I heard Jennifer going down the stairs, I said, "Are you okay, Sarah?" "What did he do?" She smiled tearfully down at me and said, "He came in while I was looking for the book. I heard him smashing up stuff downstairs and then he was in here. He was livid. He hit me a few times, threw me to the floor, then went to his wardrobe and the hidden compartment. Well, the book wasn't there, so he went wild, tore the place up. I swear he was going to start on me again, but the police came. He seemed to pause for a second, then he got this panicked look and hit the big one. Then they got him on the floor. He looked terrified and enraged." She started crying again, so I climbed onto the bed and hugged her, trying to comfort her. We sat together until the paramedics were led into Magestone's room by Jennifer. She gently pried me from Sarah and led me downstairs and into the family room, which had escaped Magestone's destruction, and turned on the TV for me. I couldn't get interested in the cartoons, being worried about Sarah, and Jennifer had to make me stay in the family room, even going so far as to threaten me with a spanking, until the paramedics came back down. One of the paramedics spoke with Jennifer, telling her that Sarah was relatively unharmed, aside from some bruising, but to watch her for signs of concussion. Jennifer thanked the paramedics and showed them to the door. I stayed where I was, the threat of a spanking still strong in my mind. Jennifer asked Sarah to come down into the family room after the paramedics had gone. Her mood seemed to have changed, becoming serious. When Sarah came down, Jennifer asked her to wait while she retrieved something from her room. Sitting beside me, Sarah held my tiny hand as we waited for Jennifer, neither of us saying anything and both wondering what Jennifer had gone to get. Jennifer returned with a leather case. Opening it, she removed the grimoire, eliciting a gasp of surprise from us both. Looking at Sarah, Jennifer said, "Now, Sarah, would you mind explaining why this is in my house, and what you know about it?" Sarah swallowed hard and asked, "Where did you find it?" Jennifer replied, "It was on my nightstand when I awoke this morning, but enough about that. Could you please answer my question?" Slowly told Jennifer everything that Darby had told her, including my transformation. Sitting down, Jennifer looked at us both and said, "My late husband told me the grimoire's history and the power it has. He also told me the fear he had if Gerald should find it." She looked at me and said in an emotional voice, "I'm sorry for what he did to you, and if there is a way, we will restore you to your former life." It's hard to believe it. I can remember every detail of Jessica's life, especially giving birth to you, her. I could feel tears brewing in me, seeing the woman I regarded as my mother close to crying. Sliding off the sofa, I ran to her and climbed on her lap, hugging her as we both cried together, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah joined our hug. We spent the rest of the evening talking and watching TV, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Because Jennifer and myself had eaten well at Rachel's party, and Sarah had a cooked meal before the cook had left, we didn't bother with any food. I couldn't believe it. My time as Jessica was almost over, I thought. I felt a twinge of guilt at the idea of robbing Jennifer of her only child, but at the same time I wanted my old life back again. But right there and then, such thoughts quickly slipped from my 5-year-old mind, and I just chatted with the grown-ups. As the evening drew on to 7 o'clock, I began to get drowsy, eventually falling asleep in Jennifer's lap, waking briefly as I felt myself carried upstairs to bed, and again as Jennifer tucked me into my bed, Sarah behind her, smiling at me. Then I was asleep. And I dreamt. I was in my bedroom, dressed in my pink night dress. Outside my window, I could hear someone hammering at the front door. Walking to the window, I somehow managed to open it and looked out. Down below, I could see Magestone. He was surrounded by a nimbus of sickly yellow light that pulsed like a heartbeat. I backed away from the window, afraid he would see me, but it was too late. He snarled and scrambled up the wall like a gigantic spider, climbing onto the ledge outside my window. "You," he hissed, insane with rage, his eyes glowing with that same sickly yellow light. "Always you! I will not allow you to thwart me. I will get the grimoire and unlock all its secrets. But first I will feast upon your soul." I was terrified, fear paralyzing me within easy reach of him. But when he tried to reach through the open window, an electric blue field of light suddenly appeared, causing him to scream and yank his clawed hands back. He sat there, staring at me, his hands smoldering from contact with whatever barrier had been placed between us, and said, "You cannot remain in there forever, little girl. And when you do come out, I will be waiting." Oh yes. And the same goes for that whore you now call mother, and Miss King also. I felt a hand on my shoulder then, spreading a calming warmth through my body, and I saw real fear on Magestone's face. A powerful male voice boomed from somewhere above me, "Go back to your body, corrupt and twisted creature. You cannot enter this house, be it through the dream world or the waking. Go now, before I sever the cord that binds you to your husk." Hissing like a scalded cat, Magestone leapt from the ledge and ran from the house, fading into the shadows as he did so. Strong hands picked me up and I saw I was held by a man in his 50s. His body was somewhat transparent and an electric blue glow suffused his form. A gentle smile on his lips, he said, "I am David Magestone, Gerald's father, and, because of his tampering with fate, I am also your father." I realized then that I was being held by a ghost and became frightened. But his face was gentle, kind, and his voice soothed me, easing my fears. "Do not be afraid, little Jessica, I would never harm you. I wish though I could have prevented Gerald from using the grimoire to transform you as he did, but I was dormant. But each time he used the magics I grew in power, until I could manifest." Some of the words he used were beyond me now, my vocabulary only that of any other 5-year-olds, but I got the gist of what he was saying and nodded my understanding. "I can only exist in the confines of the house and its grounds for now. Beyond I am as yet powerless, and although he does not have the grimoire, he is still linked to it and can draw on its power. So be wary," he told me, his voice gentle and sad. "Did you give Gerald's book to Mummy?" I asked him, curiosity getting the better of any lingering doubts about him. He laughed and nodded. "Yes, little one, I took it from where he had hidden it, knowing he would return to claim it, and placed it on your mummy's nightstand, knowing she would keep it safe. But now you must return to true sleep, my daughter, and know that whatever happens I will always be watching over you." I hugged him, feeling the strange, comforting warmth of his presence, and kissed his cheek. He carried me to my bed and I could see myself lying asleep, clutching my teddy bear to me. The ghost of David Magestone lowered me into my body, and as I was drifting back into sleep, I felt his kiss on my forehead. Sunlight on my face woke me, and opening my eyes I saw Sarah pulling back my curtains, her right eye still half closed with the swelling and now a classical black eye. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said to me, amused by my groggy state. "It's 11 o'clock. Jennifer said to let you sleep in. And seeing as Fiona won't be back until around 5 today, I said I'd get you ready." I blushed, embarrassed by the idea of Sarah bathing me. It was one thing for her to know that the little girl she was talking to was her boyfriend, but it was a completely different thing for her to actually treat me like a little girl, even if that was exactly what I was for now. She sat on my bed beside me and smiled. "Look, you have no reason to be embarrassed about this. It's not your fault you're a little girl, and I don't think any less of you because of it. We have the book now, so it's only a matter of time before you are restored to your old self again. So relax, and who knows, you might even have a little fun." I nodded and hugged her, still feeling a little embarrassed, but managing to overcome it, and allowed her to take me to the bathroom and undress me, as if I had any choice in the matter. We actually had fun. Sarah teased me mercilessly, making me giggle uncontrollably. She tickled me and splashed water at me, and I splashed her back, laughing and forgetting my troubles for a while, just enjoying being a little girl having fun in her bath. After bathing me, Sarah dried me, using a hairdryer on my long blonde hair, and combed it out, leaving it loose. She then took me back to my bedroom and dressed me in a pink t-shirt and a denim skirt with a bib putting pink socks and a pair of pink Mary Janes on my feet. She stood back and examined me. "Well," she said, amused at the situation, "don't you look cute?" I shot her an icy glance, making her laugh. Taking my hand, she took me downstairs for breakfast. As we were eating breakfast, I told Jennifer and Sarah about my experience during the night. "Are you sure it wasn't a dream?" Sarah asked me. "No, it was real. I could feel things. You don't feel things in dreams," I replied, maybe a little harshly than I should have, earning a reprimanding look from Jennifer. "Well, even so, Gerald is locked away in the police station now, so he can't hurt us," she said almost in a condescending manner. "What did this ghost look like?" Jennifer asked. I described him as best I could and saw Jennifer's eyes widen slightly in surprise. "That's a near-perfect description of David. And I doubt you would have remembered him since he died when you were 3 years old." "Sorry, but I keep forgetting." I smiled and told Jennifer that David's ghost had said that, for now at least, I really was his daughter. This got me a smile in return. We spent the rest of the day in the grounds. The sun was shining and it was too good a day to waste inside. The grounds of Darkhaven House were extensive, possibly stretching for 1.5 miles of gardens, lawns, and carefully tended woods. There was even a hedge maze near the house itself. Jennifer and Sarah kept me occupied with games and little jokes. We even played hide and seek in the woods. I wasn't very good at this, being prone to giggling, but I enjoyed every minute of it and felt a little upset when Jennifer announced that it was close to my bedtime. When I complained, she told me that while I was her daughter, I'd do as I was told, and besides, it was a school night. Until I regained my former life, I still had school to attend, like every other little girl. I accepted her argument and we headed back to the house, with me still in high spirits because of our games, skipping along beside them as we walked back to the house. When we neared the house, I spotted Fiona's car parked in its usual place and ran up to the house. Running up the steps to the front door, I raced into the foyer and, seeing Fiona leaving the kitchen, I bounded over to her and gave her a hug. "What's this?" she said, in mock surprise. "Have you missed me, princess?" I grinned and nodded, happy to see her. She smiled down at me and ruffled my hair while I told her about the weekend's events. When I got to the part about Magestone's return to the house, she knelt down and cuddled me, saying, "You poor lamb, you must have been terrified." "I was, Fiona," I nodded and said sincerely, "but Daddy came and looked after me last night." Fiona smiled and said, "I'm sure your daddy looks down on you all the time." Fiona and I chatted for a few minutes until Sarah and Jennifer entered the house. Fiona greeted Jennifer and asked Sarah about her eye, giving it an examination. Then she took me by the hand and led me up to the bathroom to get me ready for bed, bathing me and dressing me in a powder blue night dress. "Just think, princess," she said as we were walking back down the stairs, "in 3 weeks' time you'll be on your summer holidays. A whole 6 weeks with no school. I bet you're excited." I smiled and nodded, although it wasn't the summer holidays that had me excited. We entered the family room. Jennifer smiled at me, letting me sit on her lap, while Sarah told me I was adorable. I grinned at her shyly and said thank you. Jennifer allowed me to watch TV for an hour, and I nestled comfortably in her lap, drowsily watching, of all things, Coronation Street, fighting to keep my eyes open. Eventually, I was told it was time to go to bed. Kissing Jennifer goodnight, I climbed off her lap and gave Sarah a hug. Then Fiona took me up to my room and tucked me in, reading me a bedtime story from my Disney storybook. I never heard the end, as I was fast asleep before she finished, dreaming of Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. Even as I slept, I was aware of the comforting presence of David Magestone, watching over me and keeping me safe. Chapter 5: Justice. Waking up, I felt excited at the prospect of becoming my old adult male self again and smiled happily to myself, wishing I could hurry the day along. Fiona came into my room and got me up, taking me to the bathroom and my morning bath. She had me bathed and dressed in an hour, putting me in a soft blue summer dress and arranging my hair into 2 long loose pigtails, held in place with blue ribbons. As she finished tying the ribbons, she said, "Now, princess, Sarah is going to be driving you to school this morning, so you be a good girl for her, okay?" I nodded and told her I would be on my best behavior. Then I hugged her because I believed that after today I would be my old self again and she wouldn't remember Jessica ever existed. She smiled down at me and took my hand, leading me down into the dining room for breakfast. Joining Jennifer and Sarah at the breakfast table, I noticed that Sarah's eye looked a little better, still swollen, but not as bad as yesterday. We ate breakfast in silence, each of us occupied with our own thoughts about the events of the weekend and what was to come. As much as I wanted to become my old self again, I felt a pang of guilt and grief when I looked at Jennifer. Finishing breakfast, I was told to go and brush my teeth by Jennifer, who watched me with a sad smile on her face. I nodded and hurried up the stairs and into the bathroom, pulling my stool out so I could reach the basin. I hurriedly brushed my teeth, impatient to get to school and give the grimoire to Mr. Darby. Rinsing my mouth out and wiping the excess toothpaste off my lips, I raced downstairs. Sarah was waiting for me, the leather case containing the grimoire in her hands. Jennifer and Fiona with her. I hugged Jennifer and she bent down to kiss my forehead, wishing me a good day at school. Fiona hugged me too and took the time to straighten my ribbons before telling me to hurry or I'd be late for school. Taking me by the hand, Sarah led me out of the house and put me in a child's seat in Jennifer's Range Rover. Climbing in the driver's seat, she looked back at me and said, "Well, it's almost over." But Jennifer warned me she had a phone call last night. Gerald had been given a £20,000 fine for his actions, or faced 2 years in jail. Well, he's paid the fine with his trust fund and he's been released. So we'd best be on our guard. I felt scared at her news, and it must have shown on my face, because she smiled softly and said, "Don't worry, we have the book, and pretty soon you'll have your life back and Gerald will be powerless." I smiled back at her, although I still felt uneasy. It took us 20 minutes to reach Darkhaven Infant School, a trip made in thoughtful silence. Once there, Sarah helped me out of the car and, taking the grimoire, we headed off to Mr. Darby's office. As we walked through the schoolyard, I was greeted by friends and returned their greetings. Angus, the hulking 7-year-old bully, gave me a glower, then ran off, obviously not wishing to incur the wrath of Mr. Darby again. Then we were at his office door. Sarah knocked and waited. Seconds later, Mr. Darby opened the door, ushering us both in. Closing the door behind him, he asked us both to sit. His office was paneled in dark oak. On the walls were various diplomas which I couldn't read, having the literary abilities of a typical 5-year-old girl. There were also pictures obviously drawn and painted by pupils, one of which bore the name Jessica Magestone. A comfortable red upholstered sofa lined one wall and 2 oak seats stood in front of his oak desk. Mr. Darby waited for us to sit, then sat in his own executive chair, closing the blinds before doing so. "Miss King, Jessica, what can I do for you?" he asked, his voice authoritative, but not unsympathetic. Sarah stood up and handed him the case. We found the grimoire, or rather the ghost of Gerald's father did. His eyebrows rose as he took the case and he said, "Impressive. I didn't think David would have been roused by Gerald's shenanigans. He did trust me to handle Gerald, if the worst should happen." He paused and looked at me, and I saw comprehension dawn on his face. Ah, he was roused by a threat to his daughter. Interesting. He carefully, reverently took the book from its case, examining it minutely. "Well, first things first," he said, rising to his feet. "We must break Gerald's connection to the grimoire and its magic, and to Jessica too." I looked at him questioningly and he replied to my unspoken question, "Oh yes, although I doubt very much that Gerald is as yet aware of it, but whenever a sorcerer or any other practitioner of magic uses their arts on a subject, they become linked to that person. If he knew about this, he could control your thoughts, memories, your very soul would be his to command or destroy. So we must remove that threat." Needless to say, I was very scared by this bit of news, and I could also see Sarah pale at his words. He had me stand in the center of the room and hold the book while he made a circle of sand around me. I was quite nervous, but managed to keep control, telling myself that soon I would be a man again. Then he began a chant. It started as a low guttural sound and slowly rose to a final, sudden syllable shouted out as he threw his arms aside and his head back. For a second nothing happened. Then I felt a strange, almost electric tingling throughout my body. The grimoire was also tingling where I touched it. Then the sand began to shift, slowly at first, then faster, rising as it did, until I was inside a swirling, opaque funnel of sand. The light in the funnel changed, becoming an electric blue. I could now see the book and myself were wrapped in a violet nimbus, each with a tendril connecting us, and another heading away, out of the funnel. Then a figure stepped out of the swirling wall of sand. Made entirely of sand itself, the figure had no features, but it exuded a feeling of benevolence which stilled my fears. Gently the creature reached out to me, its touch warm and amazingly smooth. It laid a second hand on the grimoire and I saw the tendrils connecting me to the book dissipate, followed seconds later by the ones I reasoned connected Magestone to me and the grimoire. The creature seemed to examine me for a moment, then it bowed slowly and retreated back into the wall of swirling sand, which collapsed seconds later. As my eyes readjusted to the darker light of the office, I could see Darby and Sarah looking at me. I smiled at them to show I was okay, and Sarah practically jumped off of the sofa and hugged me. Darby took the book from me and replaced it in the case. There, the threat from Gerald is dealt with, and I have to deal with him soon too, he said, sounding somewhat fatigued. I looked at him, desperate to have the whole thing ended, and said, Mr. Darby, when are you going to turn me back into who I was before? He looked at me sadly. I knew what he was going to say and felt my stomach churn. I'm sorry, Jessica. But whatever changes are made with the grimoire are irreversible. I'm afraid you will never become Vincent McGrath ever again. I am truly sorry. I began to cry, sobbing uncontrollably as it sunk in. I would never be my old self ever again. I had been forever trapped in the life of Jessica Magestone. I felt someone pick me up and hug me, Sarah. She held me close and rocked me gently as I bawled my eyes out. After a while I calmed down, my tears used up. I still felt miserable, but able to manage it. Sarah sat back down on the sofa, sitting me on her lap and drying my eyes. She looked at Darby and said, So, what do we do now? The man I thought I would spend the rest of my life with is now a little girl, and the monster that did this to him is free. Is he going to get away with this? And what about Jessica? Darby took a deep breath, settling back down into his chair and replacing the grimoire in its case. He looked at us over steepled fingers and said, What you do now, Miss King, is nothing. Gerald has lost a considerable amount of power now his connection to the grimoire is severed, and he cannot influence Jessica any longer, but he is still extremely dangerous for any normal human to deal with. But do not fear, he is not going to escape justice. I shall see to that. He took a breath and continued, As for Jessica, I think it would be best for her to attend her classes today. Being around her friends and other young children will help her to cope immensely. He smiled and said, I am a school teacher first and a sorcerer last. Miss King, I know how best to help her. Sarah looked down at me, then back at Darby and nodded. But what about the book? Don't you need to put it somewhere where Gerald can't get at it? She asked him. He smiled and said, Gerald cannot enter the school building anymore, nor can his influence be extended into it. I took the liberty of placing wards on the school yesterday, naming him as I laid each ward. For the time being, the book is quite secure in my office safe. Well, if you're sure, she said, not sounding too convinced. Darby stood and, looking at his watch, he said, Classes are due to start in about 10 minutes, Miss King. I'll make sure Jessica's teacher is well aware that she has suffered an emotional trauma this weekend. Don't worry, she'll be well looked after. Sarah nodded and stood up, putting me on the floor beside her. I looked up at her and hugged her tightly, then, forcing a smile I didn't feel, said, I'll be okay, Mr. Darby and Miss Williams will look after me. Sarah kissed me on the forehead and told me to be careful, then left, saying goodbye to me and Darby. Darby looked at me sadly and said, I cannot apologize enough for what you have had happen to you. Perhaps someday I will be able to make it up to you in some small way. Now let's go and see Miss Williams before class begins. I smiled up at him. I could sense a gentleness in him that soothed me, and taking his hand, I was led to my classroom. During morning class my friends, Rachel in particular, picked up on my depressed mood and asked me what was wrong. After a few minutes I had to tell them something, so I told them how Magestone had terrorized Sarah and been thrown out of the house, and how he had returned while I was at Rachel's party and attacked Sarah. They accepted this and I received hugs from my girlfriends and sympathetic comments from the boys. The sympathy, and my optimistic 5-year-old mind helped me come to terms with the real cause of my depression. When lunchtime came all the other children went home for their lunch hour. As I lived too far away, I had lunch at Rachel's house. Rachel's mother was at the school gates waiting for us as we left the school building. She waved to us as we came over, and taking our hands she took us for our lunch. We had just entered the quiet cul-de-sac where Rachel lived, when Magestone's Hummer flew around the corner, cutting us off. We all froze in shock. I don't know who was the more terrified between us, but I knew exactly how scared I was. My heart was hammering like a hummingbird's, and I could only stare at the sight of an enraged and disheveled-looking Magestone climbing out of his car. He glowered at Rachel's mother and said, "Sleep and forget." Instantly Rachel and her mother slowly sank to the floor, sound asleep. Before I could gather my wits and run, Magestone whipped me up and thrust me into the rear of his car, securing me to the child's seat he still had there. Then he climbed in the driver's side and gunned the engine, spinning the car back out of the cul-de-sac. Driving fast, Magestone sped out of Dark Haven, with me as his terrified passenger. He said nothing during the drive, concentrating on the road. Finally he turned off the road and I could tell by the feel of the car, we were going over grass, possibly a field. Seconds later we were in a large building. Magestone turned off the engine and got out of the car, leaving me strapped into the child's seat, unable to release the clasps. I heard Magestone talking and strained to see. We were in a barn. Abandoned, by the looks of things, there was still straw lying here and there, but the roof had seen better days, and part of the upper platform had collapsed in. Magestone was standing near the car with his phone to his ear, talking angrily into it. "Yes, you harridan, I have your precious daughter, and if you want to see her ever again, you had better get the grimoire and deliver it to me." "Well, I'll tell you where when you call me to say you have the damn book, you stupid witch." "Oh, very well, but make it quick." He opened the rear passenger door on my side and thrust the phone up to my ear. "Talk to your precious mummy, you sniveling little brat," he snarled at me. I heard Jennifer through the speaker and said, "Mummy, Gerald took me when I was going to Rachel's house for lunch." "Don't be scared, sweetheart, Mummy will make sure you're safe," she said, sounding scared herself. "Mummy, we're in AB." I began, but Magestone snatched the phone away, snarling at me in an animalistic way. "There, you heard the little witch, now you know she's unhurt. Well, if you want her home and safe, do as I say. You have until midnight." He hung up and thrust the phone into his pocket, glowering at me as he did so. "You think you're so clever, don't you, McGrath? Getting that old has been to sever my link to the grimoire. Well, let me tell you, as soon as that book is in my hands again, I'm going to destroy everyone in that damned house, then I'm going to have fun with the villagers, especially your Mr. Darby. And I'll save you for last. I think I shall transform you into a senile old lady, would you like that? To be 100 years old?" He laughed, a sickening sound. I watched him, fearful he would carry out his threats, and fully aware that he had clearly gone insane. As the hours slowly crept by, I tried unsuccessfully to release the clasps on the child's seat. Even after figuring out how they locked and unlocked, I couldn't budge them, they seemed to have been fused together. Magestone must have used his magic to lock them, I thought. He did have to release me from the seat after 3 hours had gone by. I desperately needed to relieve myself, and had to resort to warning him I would go in the car and stink it out. He relented and let me out of the car, proving my earlier idea that he had magicked the clasps locked wrong. To make sure I didn't run away, he put a dog collar around my neck and fitted one of those extendable leashes to it. He even tossed me a packet of tissue papers to wipe myself after I was done. I ran behind an old hay bale, out of his eyesight, and did my business, wiping myself after I was done. Pulling my panties back on, I looked around, hoping to find something, anything, that could help me escape. My searching eyes caught a large hole in the wall of the barn, well, large for me at any rate. Looking through it, I was presented with a clear view of Dark Haven House. It looked to be less than a mile away, and I suddenly knew where we were. Magestone retracting the leash broke my chain of thoughts, and I was forced to return to the car. He fastened the leash to a supporting beam and stood, regarding me, hate burning in his wild eyes. Perhaps I won't turn you into an old lady. Perhaps it would be better if I allowed the world to know who you were and what had happened to you. Imagine how humiliating that would be for you, he said, cruelty, hate and insanity boiling over in his voice. I stared at him, helpless anger pushing my fear away. All he had done to me, all he had taken from me, and he was planning more when he got the grimoire back. And I knew there was nothing I could do to stop him. He grinned at me, seeing my anger, and decided to taunt me further. Or I could turn you into a big-breasted brainless slut and make you my sex slave. You'd like that, wouldn't you? I just stared at him, making him laugh harshly. He nodded to himself and continued, yes, that's what I'll do, and Sarah. I'll make you both twins, wanton, sex-crazed, brainless whores who cannot deny me anything. Laughing at his visions of me and Sarah, he climbed into the car. I could see him take a book out of the glove compartment as he settled down to wait. It was starting to get dark now, and despite my situation I was feeling tired. I had to fight to stay awake. Magestone was still reading whatever book he had and chuckling to himself occasionally. At first I thought I had just blinked, but it was considerably darker than before. I realized I must have fallen asleep. I stood, feeling the cold of the evening on my skin. Magestone was snoring in the car, which was now just a darker shadow in a near-opaque blackness. Then I saw a light, an electric blue glow that seemed to be coming from outside. It seeped through the spaces between the boards and the wall, through knotholes and cracks, and it was getting closer. As I watched, I saw the figure of David Magestone stride purposefully through the closed barn doors, his face like stone, his eyes flashed with angry lightning. Stopping near the slumbering form of Magestone, he boomed in a voice that shook the barn, "Gerald." Magestone awoke with a yelp, then screamed when he saw his father's ghost. "No! Why, you can't be here. You're dead. The car accident. You were killed," he screeched, terror in his voice. "Yes, you sniveling little excuse of a man, I am dead, Gerald. And your weakness and evil have brought me back from the grave." There was no compassion for Magestone in that icy voice, and even I felt afraid of the enraged spirit. He reached into the car and pulled Magestone out, hurling him 6 feet across the barn. Magestone landed hard, gasping and yelping, but was soon on his feet. "You have gone too far, Gerald. First you used magic that should never have been yours to transform an innocent man into a little girl in order to remove a rival. Then you terrorize my family, beat a young woman, and you even go so far as to threaten my daughter." "She's not your daughter," he screamed back, his insanity and rage beating down his fear. "You fool! When you used the grimoire's power, you didn't merely transform a man, you transformed reality. You made him my daughter. Since her transformation, she has always been my daughter." Magestone snarled, his hands beginning to glow with violet light. "What rot you speak, dead man? I don't have to fear you anymore. I have enough power to put an end to your ghostly existence." He thrust his hands forward. Violet flames arced out, striking the enraged phantom full on the chest, spreading out over his form until he was engulfed by them. I watched, petrified, my heart racing as the ghost of David Magestone blazed with the magical fire. "How does it feel, father? How does it feel to be blasted into oblivion by your weakling son?" Magestone cried, triumph dripping from his words. "Actually, it tickles slightly," came the reply. Magestone stopped ranting and stared at the ghost, watching as the violet inferno receded from his body and traveled down his right arm to form a glowing violet ball in the palm of his hand. "That's impossible," he screamed. "Nothing can survive hellfire. Nothing that has not already died and been judged. I am beyond the constraints of mortal science or magic. Different laws apply to me," David said, his voice cold and deathly calm. He turned and looked at me, his face softening. I felt the collar dissolve from around my neck, and he smiled and said, "Now, Jessica, you are the injured party here. What should we do with your evil brother?" Magestone looked at me, pleadingly, fear in his eyes. He knew his punishment was near, and its form was in my hands. I thought about what he had said earlier, feeling no sympathy for him, only my hatred, and said, "He was going to turn me into a 100-year-old lady, Daddy. Then he said he was going to turn me into a stupid girl with a big chest, and I was going to be his naughty girlfriend." The specter pondered my words for a moment, then asked me which I thought would be best for Magestone. With childlike cruelty, I picked what I thought was the most horrible punishment out of the two. Turn him into an old lady, like he said he was going to do to me, and make him really stupid, because he said he was going to make me stupid. Hearing my sentence, Magestone started to run for the barn door, but David's hand waved at him and he froze. "Turn around, Gerald, I like to see what I'm working with," David said, anger still evident in his voice. "Unlike the magic from the book, I can alter you without having to place another being in your life. I may be restricted in more ways than a living soul, but when it comes to magic, I am no longer bound by the laws that govern it for the living." The spirit raised his hands and Magestone was bathed in a nimbus of blue light. Slowly he shrank, his terrified screams becoming higher in pitch and ever more feeble. His body took on a definite female form even as it aged, the muscles and skin withering away. His hair turned gray, then white, thinning out into a wispy halo surrounding his rapidly wrinkling skull. I watched as his now baggy clothes shrank and morphed around his emaciated form, clothing him in a long black dress and stiff white blouse. A red knitted cardigan appeared over his thinning frame and soft felt boots appeared on his feet. The nimbus of blue light faded and Magestone was left stooped over with age, his body now that of an ancient woman. "No," she cried, gazing down at herself. "You can't leave me like this." The specter stared at her, unmercifully, and said, "You have what you deserve, now leave my lands, you hideous old crone. Or I will add another 20 years to your age." I watched her totter out of the barn, her aged legs moving slowly and painfully. A wave of sympathy washed over me. Even Magestone didn't deserve this, I thought to myself. I tugged at the ghost's sleeve and whispered in his ear. He looked at me in surprise and smiled, nodding. David raised his hand again. Once more Magestone was enveloped by the blue light. She screamed in terror as she began to change again. This time the glow became opaque, nothing could be seen of Magestone. Her screams grew stronger and sounded younger until they were replaced by the cries of a baby. When the light receded, a baby girl lay in the place of the old woman. I ran over to investigate her. Even as a 5-year-old girl, I still retained some of my adult knowledge and knew that Magestone couldn't have been more than a few days old. Giving him a chance for a better life, and perhaps to grow into a better person, was more satisfying to my child's mind than the exacting of revenge. I looked up at David and asked if I could hold her before he sent her to her new life and new parents. He smiled and nodded. Carefully, I picked up the baby girl that had once been Magestone. She smiled and wriggled, happy with my contact. I looked down at her, seeing the innocence of the newborn in her face, and smiling I whispered, "I hope you grow up happy and I hope you never remember who you used to be." Kissing her on the forehead, I put her back down and watched as she faded from sight. David came up behind me. Placing his hands on my shoulders, he said, "It's time for you to go home, Jessica. The police will be here soon and they'll want to ask you lots of questions. Tell them Gerald got scared and drove away, leaving you tied up here." I nodded, feeling sleepy, and felt the collar again around my neck. As sleep overcame me, I dimly saw Magestone's Hummer fade away, while the ghost of David Magestone, now my father, sat beside me, keeping me safe as I drifted off to sleep. A gentle shaking awoke me. Still half asleep, I looked around. It was still dark, but there were lights bobbing and weaving around. It took my sleep-drugged mind a few seconds to realize they were flashlights, and another few seconds to realize that a policeman was crouched beside me, still trying to wake me up. I sat up, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes. The policeman unfastened the collar, removing it from my neck, and shouted that he had found me. Seconds later, a policewoman was by my side, asking me how I felt, if Magestone had touched me in a bad way or hurt me. I told her he hadn't, and she asked where he was. I told them he had got scared and jumped in his car, driving off, leaving me here. She seemed to accept this and picked me up, carrying me out of the barn. She took me to a nearby police car where she fastened me into the rear passenger seat as well as she could. I was still sleepy, but managed to stay awake as she drove me home. Arriving at Darkhaven House, I was carried from the police car up to the house. Jennifer, Sarah, and Fiona were at the door. I could tell they had been crying, Jennifer most of all. The policewoman handed me to Jennifer and told her that Magestone had left me unhurt. Jennifer thanked her and the policewoman told her that I would need to be interviewed by a child psychologist tomorrow. Jennifer arranged an appointment time with the policewoman, who radioed it into the police station, saying goodbye. Jennifer closed the door as the policewoman walked to her car. She carried me up to my bedroom, telling Fiona that she'd put me to bed, Sarah following us. Once in my room, Jennifer sat me on my bed. My hands sought out Teddy and I clutched him to my chest, relieved that I was safe. Sitting down beside me and pulling me into a cuddle, Jennifer asked me what had happened. Slowly, I told her everything, starting with Darby's revelation that my transformation was irreversible to Magestone kidnapping me near Rachel's house and finally his eventual transformation. She looked down at me and kissed my forehead, saying, "You poor little thing. After everything you have been through these few days. But never you mind, Mommy will make sure you're the happiest little girl ever." I smiled up at her and looked over to Sarah, who was leaning against the wall silently. She looked back, a sad smile on her face, and said, "Well, I'm happy for you, Jessica, in that you're free from Gerald. But I still lose the man I love." I jumped off my bed and hugged her, feeling sorry for her loss. She smiled at me and said, "Don't worry, Jess, I'll get over it, especially now I know you're safe." Jennifer said I should have my bath and go to bed now. Sarah offered to bathe me and put me to bed. I asked if they could both do it. My bath time lasted for an hour, Sarah and Jennifer playing with me and teasing me, making me screech with laughter, and decidedly raising their spirits too. And while Jennifer washed me, Sarah tickled me, reducing me to a giggling, squirming mass. All too soon, my bath was over and I was dried and dressed in my night dress. They led me out of the bathroom, each holding one of my hands, and swung me between them, causing me to laugh and giggle. After tucking me into bed, Sarah read Sleeping Beauty to me, until I fell asleep. That night I dreamt. I was in the foyer of Darkhaven House. David, my father, was with me. He looked down at me and said, "Your old life has gone forever, and your new life is so full of promise and wonder. I know you have accepted this in your heart, so I have come to tell you this. When you come of age, you will be initiated as one of the guardians of the grimoire. Your compassion with Gerald was the deciding factor. You are truly my daughter now and nothing will ever change this." I smiled up at him and he bent down, kissing my forehead, then slowly, he faded away, only his voice remained, echoing through the halls. "I have seen to it that your friend Sarah will find happiness soon, and remember, I am always near you, should you or your mother need me." Then I was alone, but I wasn't scared. The house was warm and welcoming and it was home. Epilogue. Sarah indeed found happiness. After the holidays she became involved with my old roommate, Guy Morgan. They quickly became deeply in love, especially when his on-off girlfriend Emma had split when he had caught her with another man. Sarah continued to stay at Darkhaven House, a permanent friend of the family, and so of course did Guy. They would take me and my best friend, Rachel, all over on weekends and holidays, and treated me almost like their own daughter. As for my school life, I found out quickly that I was quite gifted, finding the infant school curriculum little challenge. I even managed to put the bully Angus in his place by working him into such a temper he tried to hit me, but I ducked and he broke his fist on the wall behind me. And at home I had become Jessica in totality, with no sense of loss for my former existence or my old family. Magestone had tried to destroy me and take Sarah for himself, but he had only succeeded in destroying himself. But wherever the baby girl who used to be Magestone was, I wished her a good life.